To formally welcome everyone to the webinar, I would like to pass the microphone over to my dear friend and colleague, Annamie Antoine, who is the Director of Indigenous Engagement. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see many folks. First, I want to extend my gratitude for the invitation to this fireside chat webinar hosted by the School of Leadership, and to the many family members who made it happen today. Great work, everyone. I want to acknowledge I am located on the Lekwungen, Songhees Nation and Cossacks and Esquimalt Nations traditional lands. I'm grateful to the ancestors and the families of these lands who have welcomed me, who have guided me, who have supported me in the work that I do on their traditional lands. At this time, I want you to, and I know Catherine had mentioned, to take the time to acknowledge that in the chat. But at this time, I also want you to plant your feet on the ground, and I want you to think about your ancestors and your relatives as I introduce myself. And I want to acknowledge the relatives from the north, the south, the east, and the west. And as we all come together with great intention to hear Madam Annamie Paul speak today and to answer some of your questions and curiosity. So as I introduce myself, I want you to think about the ancestors of the lands, and I want you to think about your own ancestors and then your intention today. My name, Asmanahai, is a Nuu-chah-nulth phrase. It means caring for precious ones. It comes from my mother's family from Toquat Nation of Nuu-chah-nulth lands. And in my last name, Antoine, comes from my late father, Eugene Antoine, from Saikaz Nation, from Carrier-Sakani lands. I've been working at Railroads University now for the past almost 8 years. And I've been in reflection all week and leading up to this event and thinking about the transition and the history where Madame Paul has come from, and when her family had arrived to Canada in the 60s. And at that time, I think about the systemic racism that had occurred for her family through the limitations of employment that her family could only get. And then I also reflected back on the systemic racism that has occurred when colonization, first had began, and the first time of contact for our families, for Indigenous people all across this country, and then recognizing how long it's taken from that time to where we are today, and acknowledging the first Black woman to get into a leadership role in order to try to make change. But in order to do that, you can't do that unless you have all of these people that are before and then has arrived, and then feeding that spirit in order to create a better and brighter future for the next generations. And in order to do that, and I was in a call this morning reflecting on the opportunity, and one of the elders in there had mentioned another quote saying that we continue to do this work, so it makes it less work for the next generations to come. And in that, I was sitting there, and I felt a bit of sense of relief to remind me of that purpose intention of the work that we do, not just within our respective work or respective studies, but for our families, reminding us that recognizing that the diversity and the democracy and the daring that Madame Paul has expressed. But the intention of the diversity is recognizing, for me, is that idea of equality doesn't mean that I want to be like you. Equality means I want the same opportunities if I desire to go for that same task. And then I was reflecting this week, Melanie Goodchild from Turtle Island Institute talked and had a conversation with our Railroads University family, but I also sit on our steering committee, and we've been in this reflection talking about relations, system thinking, and everything in between is that spirituality. Does an academic institution have that spiritual integrity? And that there will be a reflection in some of the research and the studies that I'm doing as a PhD student. One of the things that I really valued about Madame Paul's expression about climate change is she talked about food security. And I was listening to some of her videos and listening to some of her speeches on in the news, one of the things I keep reflecting back in our own backyard across Canada is water security. So there's 630 First Nations communities across Canada, 580,000 Métis members, and about 66,000 Inuit members. Out of all of the communities, there's 174 water advisories that are occurring within those communities that haven't been fixed yet. And then also 17 of that 174 in BC. And I know that some of even our neighbors within our area of Lekwungen and Kusatsin, the neighbor nations around here also have been on water advisories in the past as well. So recognizing that there's so much work to do, but I want to recognize all of the work that has come to where we are today, and that has lifted up some of that heavy burden on my shoulders. And then recognizing that the work and the ongoing work, I will offlift some of the work so the next generation coming will not have the same heavy burden. But in order to do that, we have to collectively do that as a community, but more importantly, as a family. Because once we're family, and I use that term quite often for our Royal Roads University, because it's important that we are working together, supporting each other, lifting each other up, and also correcting each other as well, and giving permission to be whole with each other. So I want to again thank you for everyone for including me in this webinar. And I do have to log off for about 15 minutes. I'm going to turn my camera off and my mic off, but I am looking forward to hearing what the questions are from the students. So thank you for participating. And again, Kliko on behalf of my ancestors, Haishkasiam on behalf of the ancestors of these lands and the metaphysics space. I'll pass the feather back.
Thank you so much, Asmanahai, for your poignant words, so relevant to today's conversation. I really appreciate you welcoming us in such a good way. Thank you. Thank you. So at this point, my friends, I'll just offer you a couple of notes to help guide us along here. You know, we're just briefly, I'll mention that, as I said in my own introduction, I have the honor of serving as the director of the School of Leadership Studies. And I'm so very grateful to the team of people who have made this webinar possible. And just want to give a shout out to my colleagues who are all working behind the scenes, and briefly mention our global leadership, our Masters of Leadership, Health Leadership, and Executive Leadership, as well as our values-based leadership programming. If anyone is interested in this, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it here, but at the end of the call, there will be an opportunity to learn a little bit more about that for those who would like to stay. So in terms of today's format, you've already heard a couple of introductions, a welcome from Asmanahai. What we'll do momentarily is I will introduce a couple of the other people who will be involved in today's event, and we have sort of a cascading waterfall of introductions. I'll introduce Rebeccah and Philip, and Philip will introduce Madame Paul, and then Rebeccah will introduce the number of students and alumni who will be posing some questions during this event today. So a couple of introductions here, a couple of more words. Madame Paul will join us at exactly 11 o'clock, and she'll be here between 11 and 11:30 Pacific time. So whatever time zone you're in, you can do the conversion. Now, after Madame Paul has left the call, of course, we understand that many of you are joining specifically to hear her words, but those of you who would like to stay and discuss a little bit more in smaller breakout rooms, there will be the opportunity to share some of your highlights, lessons learned, ideas, ways that you want to take action based on today's webinar. So you'll have the opportunity to do that toward the end. And then, as mentioned, I will give you a few options for staying connected to us in the school if you would like that toward the end of the webinar. So without much further ado, I would like to mention, of course, we know Madame Annamie Paul will be joining at 11, and our President and Vice Chancellor Philip Steenkamp will be giving a formal introduction to Madame Paul before she arrives. I'd also like to say a few words about Dr. Rebeccah Nelems, who is the person who has connected us with Madame Paul and who has been working very hard behind the scenes to make this a successful webinar. So our deep appreciation to Rebeccah. And let me just say a few words about Rebeccah, because in the flow, the cascading waterfall of today's events, I won't have an opportunity to introduce her later. So at this point, I'll tell you that Rebeccah Nelems is joining us from the lands of the Kusapsum and the Lekwungen families, where she and her family have been living for the past 16 years. Rebeccah is a longtime scholar practitioner in the field of leadership and became an associate faculty member here at Royal Roads University in 2018. Her research on eco-social empathy, relational leadership, the youth climate justice movement, and decolonizing research has been generously supported by the Pierre, Elliott, Trudeau Foundation, the SSHRC, and the Canadian Federation of University Women. She feels accountable in everything she does to the next 7 generations of young people and to the Indigenous families on whose lands she lives. So thank you very much in advance, Rebeccah, for your gracious facilitation of the event once Madame Paul joins us today. And so just briefly, before I pass the microphone over to you, Philip, I'd like to invite my colleague, Selena. If you could help me, we'd just like to get a sense of who's out there in the audience today. So we have a mechanism for doing this, and it's through a poll. So Selena, if I could just ask you, wonderful, you've launched the poll. We'd like to know who's in the audience today. Thank you, thank you. That's just a little prompt to get us thinking about the themes of diversity, democracy, and daring leadership. And with that, we'll close the poll and I'll pass the microphone over to you, President Steenkamp. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'd like to extend a huge warm welcome to everybody who's joining us today, current students, alumni, guests, and of course, members of staff and faculty here as well. I'm joining you too from my office on the campus of Royal Roads University on the lands of the Lekwungen and the Kusapsum people and ancestors. And it is truly a privilege for us to be able to live and work on these lands each and every day. So we've got about 8 or 9 minutes before Madame Paul joins us. So I thought I would just take the opportunity to talk a little bit about the importance of leadership at this time, and then to do a formal introduction of Madame Paul just as she joins us as well. And you know, reflecting on the session today, I was thinking that you know, the challenges we are facing today are extraordinary challenges. They are as serious and as daunting as any challenges we have faced in generations. We obviously are seeing an economic transformation occurring at a pace that makes the Industrial Revolution seem like continental drift. The climate crisis, of course, is an existential threat around the world, the destruction of ecosystems and the incredible consequences of climate change. And all of this really requires a very robust civil society and very adept and creative leadership. But here too, we've seen absolutely daunting challenges with the rise of populism and strident nationalism. And we find the very tenets of civil society and liberal democracy under challenge. So these kind of systemic and interconnected challenges are clearly beyond the reach of individual institutions and traditional approaches, and they really require a level of unprecedented collaboration and innovative systems approaches and solutions. And that's why I'm so excited about the topic today, because they really do require leaders who bring to their leadership daring commitment to diversity, because all voices are needed here. All voices need to be heard in order to tackle these problems. And of course, a deep commitment to democracy, which is under very serious challenge right now. And here at Royal Roads, we are deeply committed as well to equipping students with the skill sets that they need, with the tools they need to succeed and thrive in this ever-changing and uncertain world. And we've been developing over the last year a new vision for our next 25 years. This is our 25th anniversary year this year. And as a community, we got together to ask ourselves the question, who do we want to be? Who do we need to be in 25 years' time? And we've developed a new vision statement, which I think resonates very strongly with this time and also with the themes that Madame Paul will be addressing as well. Our new vision statement is inspiring people with the courage to change the world. And the values associated with that vision are caring, creativity, and courage. And I think you'll find that these values are quite similar to the themes that Madame Paul is going to talk about today. When I think about courage, she talks about daring, and I'm very interested to hear her discussion about daring and why daring is important right now. Caring, for me, is a commitment, obviously, to take care of each other, but it's also a deep commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And creativity, I think, is something we need more than ever right now, given the complex and challenging nature of the issues that we are all facing. So we've developed this vision, and we are proceeding to implement the vision, in the years ahead, of course. Through the visioning process, though, what became so clear to me was how important clarity of vision and purpose is, how important it was to focus on people, not only who's involved, but how they are involved. So diversity and inclusion, engagement and collaboration, a bias to action. I think people find endless planning enervating and demoralizing. And we need to give people the courage to act and also to fail. And also the acceptance of change is a constant, and the need always to be iterating, experimenting, and adapting. And this is all done in the context of a pandemic year, which has been an extraordinary challenge. And what the pandemic has shown us, I believe, is that the inequities and the injustices in our society are much deeper than we even imagined. We've seen those inequities and those injustices laid bare. And there've been some incidents and some episodes through the last year which have graphically brought that to light. Most notably, the murder of George Floyd, and that trial is on right now. And that really led to a very deep examination of issues around racial justice. And here at Royal Roads, we established an anti-racism task force. And that task force is just reported out with a set of very ambitious and I would say daring recommendations, which will challenge us all in the years ahead. I mentioned too the ongoing climate crisis as well. And here at Royal Roads, we've established a climate action task force, which is busy consulting with the community and is scheduled to deliver a report this year to really help us lay out a path for a real commitment here on the operational side, but also on the research side and the teaching side, a real commitment to be partners in the solutions that we need to discover in order to address climate change. Our vision too is based on the framework established by the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are deeply committed to doing everything we can to address those goals as well, and work in a collaborative and multilateral way as we proceed. What has become so clear to me is you can't make change happen by yourself. You can't drive it with a predetermined agenda. It is so important to listen, to engage a broad spectrum of people, to create the space for creative and independent thinking, and to allow debate, challenge, and iteration all of the time. And you need to inspire people by example. So we have a fabulous example coming up in Madame Paul. I have taken the opportunity in preparing for this session to read about her biography, and as Menahai and Tuan spoke a little bit about her background as well. But I thought I would take the opportunity as we're waiting for us to join the session here to talk about some of that background by way of introduction so we can maximize our time with her when she joins us. As Asma Antoine mentioned, Madame Paul is the daughter of immigrants who arrived in Canada from the Caribbean in the 1960s. And she was deeply influenced by her family's determination to embrace everything Canada had to offer. I was so struck by the story of her learning to swim and to skate and being one of the first students to graduate from a national French immersion program in her home city of Toronto. And also the story of her mother and her grandmother, who were skilled but came to Canada, and that skill and that experience was not immediately recognized. But they were able to take up professions as teachers and nurses as well. Madame Paul was very engaged with public policy from a very early age. She was an Ontario legislative page by the age of 12. And I understand a regular attendee of rallies and protests as well. She went on to complete a Master's of Public Affairs at Princeton University and a Bachelor of Laws at the University of Ottawa. And she is also called to the bar in Ontario. And over the years, she's been honored to be selected as an inaugural Action Canada Fellow, an Echoing Green Fellow, a member of our Recruitment of Policy Leaders program, a member of the University of Ottawa Common Law Honor Society, and a recipient of the Harry Jerome Award. Now, a large part of her professional life has been focused in international affairs, having worked abroad as a director for a leading conflict prevention NGO in Brussels, an advisor at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and a political officer in Canada's mission to the European Union. She also co-founded and co-directed an innovation hub in Barcelona for international NGOs working on global challenges. And she served on the board and advised a number of international NGOs, including the Climate Infrastructure Partnership, Higher Education Alliance for Refugees, and Institute for Integrated Transitions. So as you can see, an astonishing record of activity and activism as well. And promoting diversity in Canadian politics is a long-standing commitment of Madame Paul's. After graduate school, I know she founded and directed the Canadian Centre for Political Leadership, which was a nonpartisan charity that trained women and underrepresented minorities to run for elected office, many of whom are now serving their communities in elected roles. She also volunteered with Operation Black Vote Canada and served on the steering committee for Equal Voice Canada, which are two nonpartisan organizations working to diversify our political representation. And she has published widely on social inclusion and representation in Canadian politics. Madame Paul lives with her husband and teenage sons in Toronto. And of course, in 2020, she became the first Black Canadian and the first Jewish woman to be elected leader of the federal party in Canada. Her focus is on democratic, diverse, and daring leadership, the focus of our session with her today. And we are deeply honored, Madame Paul, to have you join us to share your wisdom and experience. Thank you so much.
There we go. Okay.
There we go.
It was a double mute. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And thank you so much for having me. I'm here in Toronto on the traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, which I say with a great deal of gratitude and thanks and commitment to being a strong ally, I hope, in this new role of mine. And it is really very, very nice to be with you today, albeit virtually. And I want to thank you so much for the invitation. I'm always attracted to anything that has the word leadership in it for starts, just because I've been thinking a lot about leadership recently. My own, I would say, what type of leader I want to be in this role. I had thought about it during the leadership campaign as well. What I hope to contribute, how, while I'm even in this role, and I'm named as the leader, how I can continue to foster the leadership of others, how I can mentor the next generation of leaders, how I can continue to identify leadership within our own party. And then now, as we look, I would say very unfortunately, towards the prospect of having an election, perhaps within the next couple of months, but almost certainly before the end of this year, I have been thinking a lot about leadership and what kind of leadership we want to attract to run for us as candidates, for instance. And we launched a campaign called Time to Run, which really was about reconceptualizing what leadership means within the political landscape, because the definition of leadership, the perception of what a leader is, what makes a good leader, what would make a good political leader, is still quite traditional. It's quite antiquated. It's quite exclusionary. And this was an opportunity for me to think in this role about how we could really not only acknowledge, but celebrate and encourage a different kind of leadership to step forward. The people that we all know that even before this pandemic were thinking about their communities, were thinking about how they could be of service, were thinking about how they could fill the voids, big and small, that they saw around them, that were doing it without a lot of fuss, that we're doing it without any kind of government intervention, with very little direction, but just some kind of inner drive, some sort of passion, some kind of vocation to be of service. And we've really seen that kind of leadership shine through throughout the pandemic. It is more than anything. I mean, even with the very important benefits, emergency benefits that were created, that were important, the subsidies, all of the government interventions, I sincerely believe that had we not had that kind of self-creating, spontaneously emerging leadership all across this country, within our communities, within our neighborhoods, and even on a person-to-person basis, we would not have made it through. We will not make it through without that. And so this is, for me, really a moment to really celebrate that leadership, and also to say to it that the work's not done yet, and that it's time to step forward. Again, it's time to dig even a little bit deeper into your resource bank, your energy bank, and use it for what comes next. And I acknowledge that that is a challenging thing to say, because this has been a very draining time for all of us. Many people are physically exhausted, mentally exhausted. We still are in the midst of the third wave, which could potentially be worse than the first two. And so asking for even more, I know it is not an easy thing, but the fact of the matter is that whether it's before the pandemic or because of what has happened during this pandemic, we have a great deal of issues, challenges, but also opportunities that we're going to need to be making decisions about soon. We want to already know, I would say, how we're going to answer the question about in the post-pandemic about how we value life. What is a life worth? What amount of dignity do we consider every person in this country, but not only our own, to be, what kind of life of dignity do we feel that they deserve? That is a question that we have been asking and answering on a daily basis. But as we emerge eventually from this pandemic, it's one that we will need to answer again. And if we say what I feel people in Canada and around the world have been saying, which is that we value life, we value the inherent dignity of it. We believe that everyone should have access to a dignified life from the beginning to the very end. Then we do need to make some changes, and that's going to require a certain kind of leader and leadership. We also have challenges that predated the pandemic, or big questions to ask that also are going to require a kind of special leadership. We know that even before the pandemic, artificial intelligence and automation were changing the nature of work. that many of the professions that exist now are not going to be around in 5 years. And the pandemic has only accelerated that. The things that are able to be automated, the things that are able to be replaced through artificial intelligence, they are being replaced, and they have been at an accelerated pace. And so how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to find alternative options for people who are displaced, not just in terms of employment, but in terms of ensuring that, again, life is meaningful and that everyone has a path forward that is meaningful to them. So that is a question. And of course, we have, as always, the climate emergency, which has not gone away. It has not paused. It has not taken a break. We are just being pummeled from all sides right now with many different things, and this is certainly one of them. And you know, the fact of the matter is, here in Canada, we still are not fulfilling our commitments. We're not fulfilling our promise. We are one of the few developed countries left that still year on year is increasing its greenhouse gas emissions. And we are in general amongst the top 2 or 3 worst emitters per capita in the entire world. And so this other crisis has not stopped and requires our urgent attention. And we have the opportunity, an extraordinary opportunity emerging from this pandemic, to make the investments that are going to allow us to really dramatically accelerate our transition towards a net zero economy. And it's going to require creativity. It's going to require innovation. It's going to require, as I said, a different kind of leadership than what we have seen so far in general. And so, you know, whether it's completing our social safety net or addressing the climate crisis and seizing the opportunity that we have for a truly sustainable green economy that respects the limits of our planet and the finite resources of our planet, and also recognizes the other things that we have said that we value throughout this pandemic, like our well-being and our time with our family and our health. This is the time that we get to do that. And then I guess finally, when we consider all that we have been confronted with in terms of racial and social justice, in terms of our continued failures to fulfill again our commitments in terms of reconciliation, this is the time for that as well. And we have understood, I hope, how interconnected all these themes are. That, you know, if you're plugging a hole on the climate, but you're not plugging the holes on environmental racism or on reconciliation, then you just simply are not, you know, the water is still going to be leaking out of somewhere. There's still going to be the problem. So all of that to say that it's a tall order. It's a tall order, and the kind of creativity and innovation, the passion, the intellect that really tackling all of those challenges and seizing all of those opportunities will take, that is going to come from everywhere. And that is often not going to look the way that we expected it to look, or the way that we have seen it in the past. And so we need to make sure that we are creating as many avenues of opportunity as possible for that leadership to emerge, and for people who have not imagined themselves in those, in the, let's say, more public-facing roles of leadership, to step forward and to take the leap and to be able to conceptualize and imagine themselves involved in those conversations, in those decisions, in crafting those proposals, because that is what we all need. And it is one of the greatest things that we have available to us in these, in this country. And I want to see us make sure that we make use of all of it. So, you know, leadership, I'm hoping, even by being in this position myself, coming from, in some ways, a very traditional background, because yes, I am a lawyer, and yes, I'm trained as a policy analyst, but perhaps in an untraditional way, because there has never been anyone that looks like me in a role like this before. And I have done a variety of different and fairly unusual things. I hope that that allows some leaders who haven't really ever imagined themselves in these roles to see what it looks like, what it feels like, what kind of a difference it might make, and why it might be worth the trouble to do it, because it can be a lot of trouble and bother, I can tell you. And so, I'll leave it there, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. I don't know many of you. I recognize a couple of the names, but I will just say that my instinct is that you are some of those people. And so already I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to acknowledge your leadership and say that, we could not and cannot get through this without it. And to just encourage you to really not only accept the acknowledgement from me and the celebration that I extend, but also to celebrate yourself. And particularly at this moment, and all that you do. And with that, I guess I'll pass it back to our moderator, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Paul, for your being here today with us and for your inspiring, thought-provoking opening remarks. It is so wonderful to see you. In true Royal Roads and School of Leadership fashion, we want to take this time, this opportunity, this space we have with you to turn it over to our incredible students. So we have a number of students and alumni of the School of Leadership that have questions that they would like to pose to you and to get to engage in hearing your response.
Wonderful.
So without further ado, sorry.
I said wonderful.
Without further ado, I'd love to welcome Odian Welch. Odian is joining us today from Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place, traveling route, and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Nihilwak Cree, Tutina, Niitsitapi Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Haudenosaunee Iroquois, Dene Sulene, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, and the Inuk Inuit, also known today as the city of Edmonton. Odian goes by pronouns she and her and is in the second year of the Masters in Leadership program and is a self-proclaimed nerd who loves challenging the glass barriers that exist towards BIPOC females. Welcome, Odian.
From one nerd to another.
It's the best. May the 4th just coming up.
Oh.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Rebeccah, and bonjour, Madame Paul. Je m'appelle Odian Welch. That is all the French you'll get. I was born in Alberta to a single Caribbean immigrant parent, and I'm currently working as a mental health youth coordinator in a BIPOC-focused organization that recently launched Western Canada's first free Black-focused counseling clinic. So I have a really strong passion for mental health in the BOPIC community for females, and I am an Amazon bestseller regarding the topic. So that's kind of more of my nerdness. And so my question to you today is, what do you think are the most significant barriers that minority women are facing that are looking into joining politics? And what are you doing to reduce them in your new role?
So thank you very much for the question. And I think that was part of the introduction. But the first thing I did after I finished my master's down in the States, and I was very lucky to receive a fellowship from an American foundation to support my work, but it was to come back to Canada and to try to not only figure out why we had such significant underrepresentation of equity-seeking groups in our politics and public policy. So not just elected politics, but also our agencies, boards, commissions, our senior civil service, et cetera, but also to do something about it. And so I spent the first 5 years after graduate school working with, civil society and also academics to really try to understand what the barriers were. And they're the same. This was back in the early 2000s, and really they're still the same now. The barriers that we face, and I guess even they're layered now because social media wasn't as much of a thing back then. So we face barriers to raising money. We have the financial resources. It is very expensive to run a, let's say, a credible campaign, whatever level of government that you're running for, or if you're running to be a leader. You know, in my case, the campaign, even in the context of the pandemic, you know, we had to raise within a period of about 7 months, $250,000. So that's real. That's a lot of money, and that's a fraction of what the Conservatives raised. I think the top few candidates there raised a few million. You know, these are really staggering amounts of money. So that is one barrier. The communities we come from tend to have less access to those financial resources and tend to be less organized around fundraising. Human resources as well. More important than the money were the hundreds of volunteers that rallied together to help to get me elected, and that I will need again if I'm going to win a seat. And that as well, again, if you don't have the experience, if you don't come from a background that is connected to those networks and knows how those things get done, it's a major challenge. And then the usual things that follow us through any professions. You know, there is the complete discount that people put on your education, your training, your lived experience. I had thought when I went to Princeton, and it's one of the reasons that I chose to do my master's at Princeton, I thought that by going there that I was completely neutralizing any kind of suggestion that I might not be qualified for the work I chose to do in the future. And I knew I wanted to do this kind of work. So I said, let me just get a degree from a place, you know, where people just, that's it, it's the end of the conversation. But it's not the case. What I've learned is that I will never be educated enough or have enough experience to really satisfy some people that I am up to the job. And so that is something we also have to overcome. And then of course, social media is just a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, network of toxic hate, to put it simply. So all that said, though, we still need extraordinary BIPOC women to say, despite all of that, there are things worth fighting for. Our voices are necessary. We have got to be not consulted about decisions other people make. With respect to us and our future, we need to actually be the people leading those conversations and proposing the policy. So I want to be frank, I think it's a very important part of being in this role for me to be completely honest about the challenges. But at the same time, you know, we have vaccinations now in low income communities here in Ontario as of just yesterday. And I know that part of the reason we do is because I have been pestering officials, you know, through all means necessary for weeks and weeks, along with others, to say you've got to make that pivot and we have got to protect these communities who are at risk immediately. So that's worth a lot.
Thank you so much, Ms. Paul, and thank you, Odian, for the question. Next, I have the honor of introducing Heather Tomlinson, a first-year student in the Masters in Leadership program. She's joining us today from Treaty 8 territory, the lands of the Métis, Plains Cree, and Rocky Cree peoples in northern Alberta. And Heather's very honored to be able to engage with you today and to hold space with her peers for this conversation.
Thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction, and good morning, Madame Paul. Very pleased to meet with you, and thank you for being willing to join us and answer our questions. Just a tiny little bit more about me. I was born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, and I am also the daughter of immigrants who came to Canada from the Caribbean a long time ago. And I have lived in Alberta for almost 30 years and worked in the healthcare sector for just as long. And I do want to congratulate you on your winning the election. And much has been made, of course, about the fact that you are the first Black Jewish female leader of a federal party. And I think it's wonderful news. And I really love the message that that sends to young people of all cultures. When I was growing up, I did not see myself represented in federal leadership positions, provincial leadership positions. So this is very personally meaningful for me. I do long for the day when this isn't news, when representation is so commonplace that it's not, big news. And so my question for you is, what do you feel are the crucial steps where we get to that point where this is just so common?
Excellent question, and thank you for that. That's very kind to say, and it means a lot to me. There's all the expressions. We've heard. You say you can't be what you don't see, or I really like hip hop, and Jay-Z, has one of his songs. He says, when you see me, see you, and that really is what this is about. And so, how do we get there? I will say that a lot of it, I think at this point, is really going to be dependent upon people like you and Odion, who also just asked me a question, just taking the leap, because the door is opening too incrementally, and we don't really have that much time. There is no question that it is easier than it has been in the past for underrepresented groups or equity-seeking groups to enter into the political life of our country, but it's still not that easy. And given, as I said, all of the things that I mentioned, and really the lack of time we have as I said, it's not just the challenges, it's also the opportunities. All of these things have a certain amount of time left on them. They're not limitless. We don't have the doors will close, and we need people like you, like Odion, there. And so a lot of it is really going to be just knocking down the door, just insisting, and just being willing to, looking inward and saying, am I willing to take on all of the barriers, all of the ways that I will feel excluded, all of the burdens that come with the opportunities that come with these kind of roles? So that is a big part of it. Another part I would say is that, we have to, the things that I talked about, the financial and the human resources and those networks, we have to really create those. I still did not receive the support that I should have, and I think really people wanted to offer from the Black community, for instance, because we still aren't organized in a way that we still don't have the models of how to organize in a way that makes that possible, and that's improving, but we really need to do more and more of that so that we're in a position to support each other as much as possible as we take these steps forward. And yes, I'm dreaming of the day where it is very commonplace for a woman that looks like me and a woman that looks like you to run against each other, because you're representing one party and I'm representing another. I am running in a riding actually in Toronto that is currently held by a Black MP. And there were some people that said to me, well, why are you, you shouldn't run there, because it's just odd to have one Black woman running against another. And I said, I'm waiting for the day where that is the case everywhere. I'm hoping that, well, that's all you have, people of color running against each other all over the place. That's really what we need to be striving toward. But I will say that a lot of it is really going to be on our shoulders. Systems die hard, and the vested interest in our current political system and way of doing things is not going to just make room just because it's the right thing to do, or even because it produces better public policy, in my experience.
Thank you again, Ms. Paul, and thank you, Heather. I'm sorry to keep jumping in so quickly. We understand, Ms. Paul, that we only have you for about another 8 to 10 minutes, and we have another 6 students and alumni who would love to ask questions. So what I'm wondering is, might it make sense to hear the grouping of questions, and then you could provide some closing comments?
Well, one thing that I can commit to do is speak, keeping my answers a little bit shorter, and I can stay with you for 15 more minutes. So let's try to get them in.
Wonderful.
And whichever format you prefer, if you want to cluster a couple together and have me answer them at the same time, or you just let me know what works for you.
Okay, so we've got 15 minutes. why don't we move through them quickly, and maybe we'll group them
Okay,
together. That
sounds
makes
good.
sense. Okay, so our next speaker is Suzette O'Byrne, who is joining us from Treaty 7 region in Southern Alberta. Suzette, I'm going to let you just briefly introduce yourself just to save on time.
Yeah, well, I work in the recreation industry, in the fitness and recreation industry. So it's predominantly, you know, employed by women, but in top management, the higher you go up, especially I'm in a private club scenario, it's mainly males. And so when an opportunity comes up, often I'm subjected to comments from members and coworkers, oh, so-and-so is going to get that. You know, and they're saying it to me and they don't even consider me, or I don't feel seen in those scenarios. It's always the males that are suggested those are going to be the best candidates for it. So how did you develop the confidence to disregard these comments, move beyond them, ensure you were seen, or created the leadership opportunities you were passionate about, but still stay authentic, not trying to just play the game to be the, you know, the one that plays golf with the guys?
My mom, thank you for the question, but a lot of it comes down to my mom and my grandmother, which is why I mentioned them so extensively in my bio. You know, first, I was fortunate in the sense that my family, you know, all of my family came from the Caribbean, and in the Caribbean, you know, people who look like me are, that's basically all that there is, you know, at least when they were growing up. And so everyone from the most modest person to the most successful person, everyone looked like my parents. And so they just expected that these things weren't going to be an issue, and that even if it was difficult, I had to find a way, and they weren't really interested in excuses. I feel like the Caribbean women who are on this call will understand exactly what I'm talking about. You know, they just were not interested in any kind of reasons why it wasn't going to be possible. I was also very fortunate. I'm in my late 40s, and I was very fortunate to grow up at a time where, in fact, there was, and we have never replicated it, but there was this brief shining moment of Black female leadership at senior levels in politics. For instance, we had Jean Augustine, there was Rosemary Brown, we had Zenena Conde, you know, Juanita Westmoreland Traore. There was a cluster, you know, and all around the same age. They're the age of my mom, and they actually, many of them know each other. It's this extraordinary thing. A lot of them were educators at one point or another, and they crossed paths. And so for me, I saw these women accomplishing these things and doing these things, and so it never seemed out of reach to me. So I think that's a big part of it. And I will say that having the education I've been fortunate to have did provide me, as I said, with a bit of not enough, but at least some armor that empowered me as well. So I was very fortunate, but you're absolutely right. You know, everything that I've said, you can transfer it to the private sector, you can transfer it to government agencies. The further up you go on virtually any ladder, the less likely you are to see a woman or to see an equity-seeking person. And so finding the models are very important. Finding the mentorship is very important. And I just really, I regret having to say it perhaps a little bit, but I have to say it. You have to find something within yourself as well, because as I said, the system seeks to perpetuate itself most of the time. And so there still has to be that element of, despite all of these barriers, I'm still going to do it. And yes, that continues to be my experience.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. My internet, I'm having some glitches with my internet, so I hope that I'm able to get through this next section. But I was going to suggest maybe we could have both Sharon Floyd and Tracy Dunn ask your questions together. for the mere reason that you're both joining from Dish with One Spoon treaty territories. So I will pass it over first to Sharon.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Good afternoon, Madame Paul. Such an honor to share space with you today. As a Black immigrant woman and an executive director of one of the largest shelter agencies in the province of Ontario, I've held a number of formal positions for many years, and I'm constantly reminded when I look around me how important it is to stay true to my roots and my values. I'm also aware that there's an extra level of pressure when you are the first of something. So my question is, how do you ensure that with that added pressure, you continue to stay true to yourself while also representing others?
Just insist, wonderful question, and you just have to insist upon it. Really, there's, I try to do it in little ways and in larger ways. I don't know if this is, you tell me if you think this is little or large, but I was in Ottawa just, not that long ago, a few weeks ago, well, about a month ago, and it was my son's birthday. And, I have been working so hard for so long, really for a couple of years now, and it's just never ending. And it was his birthday and I needed to go to Ottawa to do a press conference and so on and so forth. And so first I took him with me. He was turning 17. I took him with me. And then during the press conference, I just grabbed him up and dragged him there in front of the national television cameras in the press gallery and made everyone sing him happy birthday and wished him a happy birthday. And I had journalists writing to me and saying, I have never seen anything like that before. And I said at the time, I said, this is how I'm different. This is how we're different. We don't need to, as I think it was Sharon, the person that asked the question just before, I hope I remember the name correctly. We don't have to be the same. I don't have to pretend that I am something that I am not, that I'm not a mom, that I didn't have to make this decision. Here's what it looks like. And I try to do those things in little and big ways all the time. Part of it is this. I try to be as unfiltered and honest about my experience as possible, knowing that there's always a chance that I say something that a year from now or 2 years from now, someone will cut in the splice and misrepresent, but I still want to be as frank as I can be, because I am hoping that some of you, I will be honest, I'm very excited when I hear your bios, I have to say. And it doesn't have to be for us even, but you are the face of leadership, and if I can convince any of you that, as I said, that it's worth it and that you can be yourself as you do it, and even celebrate the things that make you you, and that actually might be the thing that gets you to the next level. I want to do that. So there you go. That's how I try to do it.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your authenticity.
You're welcome. You too.
Perhaps Sherry, we could highlight both Tracy Dunn and Tiffany Minta to ask their questions together, and we'll see how far we get.
Thank you very much for joining with us today. Greatly appreciate it. I'm going to bypass a lot of my bio and sum it up to say I'm a mother, a daughter, a sister, a wife, hopefully a best friend, but at times kind of a sucky best friend. So your authenticity means so much in your position. My question for you, and you spoke a lot about your mother and your grandmother, what is the one gift that your mother gave you that you carry with you today in your heart?
And perhaps,
wait for the second question, or just?
No, I'm going to give you, oh, sorry.
Perhaps we could have you ask your question as well, Tiffany.
Sure. Thank you for being here. And I will also bypass much of my introduction, and only to say that this past year, in the midst of a pandemic and the crisis of racial inequality that seemed to have bubbled up to the surface in incredible ways, I became a mom. And with that came this heightened sense of urgency that I feel to be the kind of leader that takes bold actions to move the dial on the things that matter most. Because I now have a little boy that will become a Black man in this world. So my question is, as a woman of color, I work at a university. I often find myself oscillating between advocacy, so working within the system to make change, and activism, taking a strong oppositional stance with the goal of tearing down the system. I wondered if that pendulum shows up at all for you in your work, and what lessons you might offer to other leaders navigating the complexity of inhabiting both advocacy and activism in making change.
That is an excellent question. Those are both such great questions. The answer to your question, Tracy, well, it's twofold. The first, really the thing that they gave me that I'm most proud of, because I am the mother of two sons, is the ability to give them the stink eye. That is actually the thing I'm most proud of, because if you can communicate an entire sentence with just a glance, and I can do that, and they will confirm I can, you have it all. You know, it has saved me a lot of grief as a parent. So that's gift number one. And the other one is really a sense of public service. They were both public servants. They came from a very small island where you were very much connected one to the other. They really communicated the interdependency of things, and how you really needed to rely on the community, and the community relied on you. You had to find a way always to be of service, no matter what. You didn't have to be a public servant. You could be, an artist. It didn't matter what you did. You had to find a way to be of service. So that has always stuck with me, those two things. And then, first of all, congratulations, Tiffany. I really enjoyed my experience. I continue to enjoy it. And yes, in answer to, oh my goodness, I think I just had COVID brain. Your question was, what was your question again? That's terrible. I'm just losing the train. Oscillating, yes, exactly, the oscillation, thank you. I have to confront that every day in my work, because we are a political party and we are seeking to gain seats. We're not seeking to remain a small party. We want to grow. We want to gain more seats. We believe that we would help to transform the dynamic within Parliament, and we feel that our ideas are compelling ideas. And so because of that, I continue to have to walk that line between the advocacy, the militancy, et cetera, and really also the propositional. And I would say that in our case, the way that I have managed it is whenever I let's say condemn an action or call for action, I always accompany that with the proposal. It's not just this needs to change or we need action now. It's this needs to change, we need action now, and here's how we're going to get there. It's very important, and I think that is what, at least in my role, you need to demonstrate, that you have well thought out, well considered, evidence-based, evidence-informed proposals. And once you have those, that you are willing to fight for them, you are willing to organize coalitions around them, that you are willing to hold the government, in our case, accountable against that standard. And so that's the way that I try to do it. I would also say that life has many phases. I had parts of my life where I was working in civil society for campaigning organizations, NGOs, and that was the focus. You're all in on that. And then there are other phases where you focus on creating legislation or public policy, and there's that as well. And both have a place, and both interact. So it is a balance. It is absolutely a balance. And I would say particularly for a woman like myself, there's always the expectation that I'm going to be angry and hyper militant, and that's where it ends. But I really, really try to focus also on making sure that we're always proposing concrete, implementable, actionable solutions. And, just coming back to an earlier question, my first son was born while I was a graduate student, between my first and my second year during the summer. And I took him to all of my classes with me. And, in terms of how do you make it possible and stay yourself and whatnot, I didn't ask. I just took him, I fed him in class, and then I'd pass him off to my mom or my partner. And I did that for an entire year of studies. And you know, that's how you do it, essentially. So I want to encourage you to feel free to transport your child wherever you go. They'll learn something, and you know, it creates more space for everybody else.
Thank you. Ms. Paul, I want to honor your time and the generous time you've given us. And so I wonder, Sherry, if you might be able to just highlight James Stempien's and Christine Puccini's videos, just so Ms. Paul can see. And what I'd like to suggest is what we could do is send their questions to you via email, Ms. Paul. And if it was possible for you to maybe offer a response, we could share that along with this video to send to everyone who's attended the webinar.
Great. Were they going to pose the questions now, or just, sorry, I'm not sure.
No. So what I was suggesting is, because I know you mentioned you needed to step away in a couple of minutes. So just to honor your time, wondered if what we might do is share Christine and James's questions with you via email following the webinar. And we could perhaps share the answers that you provide to those with the recording of this webinar, just to honor and respect your time, and to thank you so much for being here. And Christine and James, I hope that will also work for you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I was a little more loquacious than usual today, but thank you for the wonderful questions, very thoughtful questions. I appreciate them.
We're so grateful to you for your time, and I'd love to pass it back to President Steenkamp.
Madam Paul, thank you so much. What an inspiring conversation this has been for all of us, given the extraordinary challenges we are all facing across this country, not only the pandemic, but climate change, racial justice, economic transformation, and disruption. It's so encouraging that we have leaders like you in place. And thank you for sharing some of your experience and some of your wisdom with us today. And we wish you all the best. And I know, speaking on behalf of the students and the guests here as well, that it was truly an honor to have this opportunity to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And it was really a pleasure for me. Congratulations to all of you on your studies, on these. I mean, if this is just a sample, it's quite an extraordinary group of people. I really want to encourage any of you to reach out to me, because I know that often that is the hardest thing to do. And as I said, even if it's not with our party, I'm happy and my team is happy to point you in the right direction. I really believe in supporting and mentorship, and I try to do as much of that as possible, even in this role. So please reach out via the organizers if you'd like to you know, again, to reconnect. And thank you so much for taking the time to spend some time with me. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, thank you, Madam Paul. Thank you, President Steenkamp. Thank you, Rebeccah Nelems. At this point, I'm seeing the chat, the waterfall of beautiful comments coming through the chat. I'd just like to give a round of applause to Madam Paul, to all of the speakers, to all of the students, those who were able to ask their questions, and the many, many ideas that came forward that we couldn't even get to today. Madam Paul, what an inspiration. We know that you do need to leave now, so we'd just like to thank you very much. And you can see on Zoom a number of the
yes, thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. That's great. That's great. So I just wonder, because we know Madam Paul had to leave, I wonder if James and Christine could come back on for a moment. Perhaps Sherry, could you highlight James and Christine? And I'd just like to offer the opportunity, James and Christine, for you to ask your questions, because I know that a lot of thought and process went into this before today. And if you could ask your questions, perhaps before we move into breakout rooms. And that way people can discuss in the breakout rooms, if they wish, they can discuss their own responses or ideas from today's webinar, or perhaps what you ask might be a topic of conversation for them as well. So I'm not seeing James. It's possible, I know that he had another work commitment, so it's possible that he has left the webinar now. But Christine, would you like to go ahead and ask the questions for all of us to consider that you were planning to ask of Madame Paul?
Sure. So I'll just mention that for the past 13 years, I've worked with the Nova Scotia provincial government, in the last 9 at the Executive Council office, which kind of leads me my question of recognizing that many scholars and researchers point to systemic flaws in Western democratic systems and their tendency to enact colonialism, patriarchy, and capitalism, one might argue that the only way to move society towards a truly equitable democracy is to reconstruct the existing democratic structure. My question is, how do you propose we address the systemic flaws in the prevailing political and social order in a way that would allow us to reimagine a new kind of democracy capable of supporting a truly inclusive and equitable social and political structure?
Excellent, excellent. Well, wow, I'll be very curious to hear what Madame Paul's response is to that when she responds by email, and we will send the response out by email. But what a great launching point for all of us. In fact, given that your question is about the very nature of democracy, perhaps it's something we all can consider. How do we co-create this together? How do we co-create a new system of democracy? And so I invite you now, I'll just ask for some support from my tech friends behind the scenes. What we will do now is offer an opportunity for those of you who remain on the call for just about 5 minutes or so to go into a breakout room. You'll see it pop up on your screen. It will be the option to join a breakout room. And of course, we do understand that not everyone will be able to stay, or perhaps not everyone is interested in having that kind of small group conversation. So stay if you wish. If you don't want to join the breakout room, it'll just be 5 minutes or so that we'll stay here in the main room, and then we'll bring back everyone together for a few final closing remarks. So Sherry, over to you to invite people into breakout rooms. If you'd like to share in the chat box what sparked your passion, your creativity, your curiosity in today's session, either from anything that emerged, or in particular from Christine's question right at the very end there about fundamentally transforming our democratic system. What made you come alive? Feel free to share any comments you may have in the chat box. And we'd just be delighted to hear a little bit of feedback, a few ideas, just to get a sense of, how these ideas are landing with you. And then as we bring today's session to a close, I want to mention, as I mentioned at the outset, we do have a number of programs in the School of Leadership Studies. So if any of you would be interested in learning more about the programs that the students and alumni who were asking questions today, if any of you would like to know more about the programs that they represent, here's a map of a number of the programs we have. There's a multi-sectoral Masters of Arts in Leadership. And then we also have a suite of programs related to global leadership, including graduate diplomas, graduate certificates. We have a specialization in health for the Masters of Leadership, and a specialization in executive leadership that also has a values-based leadership certificate embedded within it. So if any of those programs are of interest to you, here's how you can get in touch with us through our enrollment advisors. There's the phone number, of course, the email address. If any of you are joining us internationally today, here's how you would get in touch with international admissions. And if you want to reach us directly here in the School of Leadership Studies, leadership.admin@royalroads.ca. And here's how you can stay connected with us on social media. Of course, we also have a blog as well, where we're regularly releasing, also through our Facebook posts, but we're regularly releasing updates from faculty, from staff, from students, and from associate faculty, all kinds of media that we're putting out there all the time. So please feel free to stay in touch, reach out to us. We hope you enjoyed today's session. Again, my name is Catherine Atmansky. It was a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you very much to one and all. Bye-bye.